The best of the Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC. Best of.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
And as I said, no stranger to radio. I think he's on the air as much as we are, probably more so. That's Governor David A. Paterson, 55th Governor of the state of New York. Good morning, Governor.
Well, good morning, and I hope you all have enjoyed the July 4th weekend.
Well, that depends on the conversation we have with you today, how enjoyable it is.
I enjoyed mine, Reverend.
Yeah. I always enjoy talking to you.
I enjoyed mine.
Yeah. So I'm watching the George Latimer victory celebration, and right next to George Latimer, Rev, is David A. Paterson. Mm-hmm. And I was very happy to see you there because, Governor, the fact that he was able to defeat someone who really promulgated such hatred, anti-Semitism, and to see Latimer win it was a statement that ultimately hatred is going to do you in. You're not going to be a victorious candidate if your platform is predicated on hating others. In this case, it was a lot of anti-Semitism. What do you say?
You know, Rabbi, I wish I could just hang up the phone and just listen in to the rest of the show. You hit the nail right on the head. And the difference between this race and other races is that this wasn't a choice between moderate Democratic political policy and progressive political policy. There are plenty of people who are progressives who are in our Democratic Party who run races all the time. What made this race more interesting and really more revolting in some ways is that this was a choice between good and evil, and not enough people sided with good. And I think that's where we are in our society. This man, Mr. Bowman, is the one who continually makes coded statements that are designed to appeal to anti-Semites. He routinely picks on the Jewish not-for-profits and the organizations that raise money like AIPAC, always talks about them. Oddly enough, doesn't talk about any other white organizations that do the same thing. So he has targeted the Jewish community, and it was time to put a stop to this. And so when I heard that George Latimer, who's a longtime friend of mine and who helped me orchestrate the change of the Senate from Republican to Democrat in 2008, he is someone who cares about people. And even in his victory speech, he talked about how the people in Washington who have common sense have got to stop talking to each other and stop reacting to the people on the far left. And my final thought is, it's one thing that I was standing next to Latimer, but there weren't too many people bothering to even get involved in this race who should have and didn't. And, you know, particularly right now, as I've said on the show plenty of times, back in the tough times when Martin Luther King was marching in some of the most dangerous places in this country and eventually did lose his life in one of those places, there were of the whites who marched with him, 65% of the whites were Jewish. Now, the Jews didn't necessarily have any issue in this conflict between the way the Southerners ran their governments and black people who lived under that rule, but they felt that, as King always said, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, and that's why they all went down there. And what I wanted to do was demonstrate to people that I heard what Dr. King said, and that's why I was in the Bronx several times, and particularly on his victory night.
Governor, Rabbi, was upset. We were on the phone talking about some of the language that was used by the incumbent, and just reducing the platform to a street level and taking away the dignity that we're trying to restore to the political process and political position. speak to that, Governor, because I'm frustrated. Of course, I'm a man of the cloth, so moral standards and all that. But
Well,
just civility. I mean, just what holds our society together.
Well, Reverend, when I was 31, I was elected to the New York State Senate, and in my first few years, I was really thinking about trying to turn out the vote among young people. So I had a lot of rallies in which there were rap performers. I mean, people you now would know who were there. And I knew that the language was going to be a little tough and that kind of thing, but that's how young people act. I never had an event, nor did I ever see one, with the profanity, the garbage, I mean, just the horrible contact that they had at that rally. Even AOC, who I probably agree with on like 5% of what she believes in, but she's always conducted herself with a certain amount of class, and I've always respected that, and, always doesn't seem to allow to let herself get antagonized. She was right in the middle of it, along with Bowman.
And Bowman, Bernie Sanders.
And Bernie Sanders, poor Bernie, probably never even knew what hit him when he got there. But the thing is that Mr. Bowman happened to be the person who I called 3 times while he was congressman. And the reason was there was a young minority male who graduated high school who wanted to go to West Point. And when they asked me why I was calling, I knew that's why they weren't calling me back. And finally, when I demanded that they give me an answer, they said, well, he should be doing something better than going in the military. So now after this guy gets through high school, they are going to presume to tell him what to do with the rest of his life. And but you know what? Now they don't have to call me back at all.
Well, they will. He may need a job,
Yeah.
Let me ask you something, Governor and Rev. I remember in school coming home with a test score, and my mother would look at it and say, Joe, is this the best you could do? And the point was, obviously, you could do better. More effort, you could do better. And I look at what's happening in Washington, and I've come to the realization we no longer ask, is this the best you can do? What we're doing is saying, which is better? That best standard has been lowered. Moynihan would talk about the dumbing down of America. But we no longer seek the best, we seek the better. Is that an accurate depiction, Governor?
I think so. And which is the least of the 2 harms that could be caused if the other guy, in this case, the 2 men running, the guy wins. And unfortunately, we're really seeing this. I mean, after that debacle involving President Biden last week, his White House has answered the same question 3 different ways. Did he see a doctor? First, they said no. Then they said yes. And then they said no again. I mean, it's an insult to the public that would actually happen. And, I've always thought if you either make a big mistake that you shouldn't have made, or you performed in a way that you're just not proud of, what you do is you own it, and then you move on, and you move on with positive ideas and opinions that will perhaps let the public see that you had a bad night. All they do is they go, oh, look, Joe, he had a bad night. I don't know if he had a bad night. A lot of people had a bad night. General Custer, 150 years ago, he had a bad night. And that's a bad night. But this kind of almost insulting the public. And then President Trump, who I've had, my business is not to compliment President Trump, but he hadn't really said anything about this because he was playing with the House's money. He was doing fine. Then he comes out on Friday and says he wants to have a no-holds-barred debate with Trump. Now, I'm sorry, with Biden. I don't know why he would do that. In other words, everything's going his way right now, but it's almost like he just can't, win. He has to win by trying to stomp on someone. And it could backfire because if they had another debate and Biden shows even the slightest improvement, it's going to look like a great improvement because the first improvement was so bad. So really wish the former president consulted with me before he said something like that.
Governor, talk about the shift. Vice president is a supportive role. It would be awkward for a vice president to try to be presidential and show some type of competition with their boss. So it is definitely a supportive role. But now the spotlight is on Kamala Harris, right? They're looking at her in a different way. The Democratic Party is looking at her in a different way. Republicans are watching. What are your thoughts on the Kamala Harris factor now?
I was kind of surprised to read a poll that showed that she's only 8 points behind President Trump. That kind of surprised me. I would have thought it was a whole lot more because vice presidents never really shine. You only really hear about them when they do something that they shouldn't have done. And so I was sort of surprised by that. But what I would say is she's had the right rhetoric. She's just said President Trump's running. I'm his vice president. We beat him in 2020. We'll beat him in 2024. It's the standard commentary. But it is interesting that we in our history have had vice presidents who got involved even when they really didn't want to, like Vice President Pence having to make what was the correct legal decision about certifying the election in 2020, and Vice President Ford having to move up to be president after President Nixon resigned in 1974. So it is a position that we probably should pay far more attention to, but presidential politics just is so over-consuming. It always comes down to being about them.
So it can wear you out. But the Democratic Party, they have to think strategically now that there is a possibility concerning, Joe Biden. And they got to think about the DNC. They got to think about the others who would like to run. If they make a decision like that, the timing is critical. Speak to that, Governor.
One idea really might be, if Biden has to step down, is let the vice president run. She probably will lose, but in the time that she's running, the party could start rebuilding, start kind of drafting those young leaders who could really be the wave of the future. And look, what's the worst thing that can happen? Trump gets elected for a second time. I kind of don't think the country is going to fall into the ocean while he's president. He may do a whole lot of things that a lot of us don't like, but now you're set up to come out in 2028. He cannot run again because you can only serve more than 2 terms. Some people thought it was 2 terms back to back.
Right.
But that's not the way it is legally.
That's an important point. I have to interrupt you there. That's an important point. It's not 2 consecutive terms. It's just 2 terms, period, right. Even though there's a disruption as with Trump, correct? Those are the rules, right, Governor?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Governor, let me ask you this. Looking back at the debate performance, it's not enough to say he had a bad night. I was reading something by Richard Haas. Richard Haas said, well, those say he's not what he was. And Haas's point was, not only is he not what he was, he's not what he needs to be. That becomes very clear. So how do you come back when it's so obvious that you really can't make the comeback necessary to demonstrate that you can effectively lead? And now when you come back and say, look, I'm not going to schedule events after 8 p.m. at night, it's a further concession to the diminished person that you are. Yeah, diminished capacity. So I don't see how you recover from that. I think the party has to look at this and say, this is not what the country needs right now. We need to make a decision, and we can't continue on this present path.
Well, unfortunately, it's remarks like that either the president or the administration advising him is taking they're taking a tact that really makes them look worse than if they'd said nothing at all. Because how do you start saying I'm going to bed at 8 o'clock from now on when the the second debate will start at 9:00.
Yeah.
But they never thought about that.
And God forbid there's any major catastrophe in the country after 8:00.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, but that was funny.
Maybe we need to wake up the president. That kind of thing. Terribly. This is a side note, but there was a terrible crash of a flight in Buffalo in 2009, and 48 people were killed, and 2 people in the house that the plane landed on were killed. And my staff did not wake me up. The crash had occurred around 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I don't find out about it until 7 o'clock in the morning. I'm the last one to the scene, and I got buried to this. And so best advice when you're president, stay as late up as late as you can and get up as early as you can.
Yeah. So where do you see this playing out? If you could predict, do you think they continue with Biden? Do you think open convention? Biden says, I turn it over to Harris. She's my candidate.
I think they'll likely continue with Biden, but they have a real problem is that the big money people that always give to the Democrats clearly seem to be indicating that they've had enough. They want to see someone else. And that's why I was saying if someone else were to run, even if they lose, you're already on your way to rebuilding the party down the road. Mm-hmm. You don't have to now spend 4 more years with Biden trying to think about who will come when he leaves. You can start now. But I think that the worst thing about this entire incident was that it exposed, not that Biden for 90 minutes was operating under some diminished capacity, but also that the administration really didn't have a plan. Sometimes you have to get up the next day. You don't wait 4 or 5 days. Get up the next day. I was not feeling well. I performed terribly, but I'm not using that as an excuse. I'll be back later on. Right now, let me get back to the business of running the country and campaigning for reelection. It would have been a quick statement. Then you move on. They're like a cat chasing its tail the way they respond to the media.
And I think they hid, or they tried to cover up the diminution of the president prior to the debate. We saw this, ongoing decline, and yet people wouldn't admit it.
Yeah. And, I didn't like when Democrats were criticizing Reagan in his second term, when Reagan clearly was not what he was when he first got elected. And then, the Republicans were saying that Obama wasn't born in the United States and these things. So I kind of took this, Biden's too old, because he's only 2.5 years older than Trump. I just took this to be political rhetoric, but now it's become a legitimate issue. And it's no longer even a question of his health. It's now a campaign issue whether his health gets better or worse.
Okay.
Governor.
Last question, Rev.
Look, I would keep him on for the rest of the evening. I mean, come on.
He doesn't go later than 8 o'clock.
But Governor, there was discussion of Trump's appeal to Americans making $50,000 per year or less, based upon our 333 million population. That's about 19% of the population, 63 million American voters. Respond to that, Governor.
I thought that he, and I've always given him credit, was really the first president to recognize the historic black colleges and universities, the HBCUs, and had them to the White House and, arranged for some sponsorship for them and that kind of thing. Then he went on to talk about it, but that was the only specific activity that he took in his first administration. And so I don't know why he'll be any different in his second administration, except that he likes to talk about things in his imagination and then doesn't make it happen. So that's, I didn't hear what I thought was sincerity from him on that subject.
Okay.
All right. Governor David A. Paterson, always enlightening to have you with us. And, ABC is lucky to have you because you bring a certain insight that needs to be heard. And here you are a member of the Democratic Party, but that doesn't prevent you from being open and honest about your feelings. And I think that says a lot about you.
Well, ABC is lucky to have the two of you. I think it actually should be a TV show on Channel 7.
Well, so far, you've negotiated 50% of the deal. Now convince ABC.
I agree.
Yeah.
100%.
Thank you so much, Governor.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Governor. And thank you, our listeners. We'll be right back to close on 77 WABC, The Rev and the Rabbi.
Reverend A.R. Bernard, Rabbi Joseph Potasnik, the best of the Rev and the Rabbi. Talk Radio 77 WABC and the all-new WABCRadio.com. Best of.
Welcome back. I'm Rabbi Joseph Potasnik.
And I'm Reverend A.R. Bernard.
Rev, the guest we're going to have on is a good friend of the two of us. Been a friend for many, many years, that has done great work, not only in the Jewish community, but in the interfaith community, one who's committed to making life better. And unfortunately, he was victimized by one of those e-bikes. We're going to talk about that with him. And I'm referring to Rabbi Michael Miller, who is the executive vice president and CEO emeritus of the Jewish Community Relations Council. Rabbi Miller, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Rabbi Potasnik. Thank you, Reverend Bernard.
All right. Now that we have all the titles straight, okay. This special edition of The Rev and the Rabbis. He's outnumbered, finally. It took us many years to get him, but we finally did it.
Now I know why you invited me.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So, Michael, when I heard what happened to you, and I think many have because it was certainly publicized in many, many platforms, and I thought to myself, this could have happened to anyone, and this has happened to many people. So describe what happened, and then we'll go through, what we can do about it.
And I just want to add, and it could happen to others moving forward. It's not just what happened in the past.
Mm-hmm.
It's what's going to be happening in the future. So it was Tuesday, May 21st. It was the day after my 75th birthday, which was really a wonderful experience for me. And on Tuesday the 21st, I believe it was at 11 o'clock in the morning, there was an inaugural Jewish Heritage celebration ceremony at the Department of Education at the Tweed Courthouse, at which Rabbi Joseph Potasnik was one of the speakers. And it really was a very, very lovely program. I'm sure you would agree with that, Joe.
Yeah.
There was a choir that sang the beautiful Hebrew song from chapter 133 in Psalms, how good and how beautiful it is when brothers and sisters dwell together. It just was splendid. And I left there on a high, walked down the many stairs that are in front of Tweed Courthouse, take a subway up to where my apartment is, was on the Upper East Side. I took the train to 77th Street and Lexington stop. I get off and I start walking east towards my apartment building from Lexington to the 3rd Avenue. Actually, I passed by a doctor from Lenox Hill Hospital, whom I know. We kind of waved at each other. I wish I would have spent a little bit more time with him, but he was on the phone. And get to 3rd Avenue. I had the light, and I wanted to cross to go west to east, just across 3rd Avenue, which is a northbound artery. And I stepped into essentially the bike lane, and I was just struck by a electric bike, which was likely going at least the speed limit, 25 miles an hour, maybe more, and just crumpled to the ground. I recognized immediately that my right leg was broken. People have asked me about pain. My right leg was in shock. So I actually didn't feel significant pain in my right leg, but my left leg, which, as you can imagine, picture it, I'm walking east, and he's going south. So he hit my left leg before he broke my right leg. So my left leg was contused, a very, very deep bruise and a cut, but it was not broken, thank God. And so that's what I felt. I felt it in my left leg, not in the leg that was broken. And there I was on the ground in the bike lane on the asphalt, and the biker paused for literally a few seconds, looked down at me. My theory is that he wanted to know whether I was alive or dead, and then he just left the scene. So a classic hit and run, but not with a motor vehicle, but with an electric bike. And I'm very, very blessed that there was a woman whom I guess in today's world would be referred to as a Good Samaritan, who rushed over to me, introduced herself, happened to have been a Jewish woman, but didn't make any difference, of course. And she told me as she called 911. And shortly thereafter, a fire truck came. Rabbi Potasnik, chaplain at FDNY, and they started to calm me down and just let me know that the ambulance was on its way. NYPD came, Community Affairs, and then the FDNY EMTs came with the ambulance. And during that period of time, I really must say to your listeners how compassionate all of these first responders were. I did actually tell the FDNY guys that I know Rabbi Potasnik, who's the Jewish chaplain for the.
He dropped the name. He dropped the name.
I hope that helped in advancing the compassion.
and despite that, they were still very helpful to me. Despite that,
you see, there it is. He clarified. Yeah. Despite that, they were helpful.
The second piece of it is that the NYPD guys came, the Community Affairs guys came with their blue polo shirts. And of course, crazy person that I am, I dug in my pants pocket and pulled out my NYPD clergy liaison ID to let them know, hey, I'm one of you guys.
Yeah.
And thirdly, of course, the EMTs were just extraordinary. They had to splint my leg. And I just tell you one maybe two quick stories. So the woman who came over to me, her first name is Mara, M-A-R-A, and she was cupping her hands over me because it was a beautiful sunny day, and she wanted to protect me from the sun while I was lying in agony on the asphalt. But all of a sudden, while my foot was being splinted by the EMTs, the FDNY EMTs, it got a little cooler. And I looked up, and this burly NYPD officer is holding an umbrella. He found an umbrella. He opened an umbrella above me to protect me from the sun. As I said, the compassion was just extraordinary. Something very special. And if we look at first responders, particularly law enforcement, as being rough and tough guys, they looked at somebody on the ground and said, we need to take care of this fellow. And in the ambulance on the way, they took me to Weill Cornell. On the way to the hospital, the EMT is just going to calm me down and saying, "Oh, he's not Jewish. He knows a lot of Jewish people. He lives in the 5 towns." So he said, "All my neighbors are Jewish." It was during that very difficult, after that calamity and during that very difficult and painful time for me. It really was the first responders who came to my aid and sought to comfort me. And of course, reaching out to my family, I gave my phone to Mara, and she called our son up in Connecticut to make his way down. I called somebody at our agency, the Jewish Community Relations Council, the JCRC. Called Cheryl Fishbein, whom I think you both know, and she got in touch with the office, and I'll tell you that story in a moment. And I called my family in Israel to let them know as well. I just to kind of round it out, they took me to Weill Cornell. The EMT told me just be prepared. We're going to take you out of the ambulance, and they're going to take you into a trauma triage room, and you'll be set upon by a lot of people. There must have been about 15, 20 different doctors and nurses who examined me from head to toe. I am very, 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 very fortunate. I say very. I'm truly fortunate that I did not hit my head. That's the first question that everybody asked me, from the FDNY to the cops to the EMTs to the triage guys, the doctors, the nurses. This really could have been tragic. More than 30 people were killed last year by electric bikes, both pedestrians as well as e-bike riders. This year, I think the number's already in double digits. I know that NBC put on the screen 8 people have been killed by e-bikes. And something needs to be done about this crisis. I view it as a crisis, not just a menace. And I've talked to nearly everyone with whom who's wished me speedy recovery, has had some close encounter with something akin to an e-bike, whether it's on the street, meaning this e-bike was going south on a northbound road. They go east on west, west on east, north on south, south on west. They don't obey stop signs. They don't obey traffic lights. They go on sidewalks. Something needs to be done.
Before we get into conversation about policy and how government and the system should respond to this, I'd like to go back to the fact that you highlighted that first responders were careful, they were respectful, they showed concern, as though it wasn't something you may have, expected. Did you expect that? And if you didn't, what does it say about our culture?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, Rev. I've spent my career working on the streets of New York for the past 40 years. And having been a clergy liaison with NYPD, but also have had encounters with FDNY. And again, I mean this very seriously, and seen the extraordinary role that Rabbi Potasnik has played. So maybe it was something that I expected, but I'm me. I'm a community relations guy. So when the FDNY people came, I just wanted almost like to befriend them, and they responded in kind. But I think that regrettably, law enforcement and first responders have gotten a bad name, and I hope that by my ability to communicate this message through you and through others, that we can understand and appreciate the thankless role in great part that they play 24/7. And I think that our society and our culture should be certainly not only just respectful of, but appreciative of the role that first responders play and the humanity of those first responders.
If we look at the first pages of certain newspapers, you'd never think there's any goodness in our world, that we're surrounded by all kinds of cruelty, inhumanity, and that's why these stories need to be told and broadcast. Right. What I want to try to understand is, Michael, why so many tragedies have occurred, why so many have complained for a number of years, and nothing has been done.
I don't have a question as to why nothing has been done. I'm kind of new to this as a victim, but there seems to be an impasse between sensibility and accomplishment. I can't put my finger on it, but I know that there is legislation in front of the city council. I know that there is legislation that was in front of the state legislature, both the assembly and the Senate, and it has not yet moved. And you both know me very well, and all three of us are advocates, and all three of us know the political arena like the back of our hands. And I did get calls, and I'm very grateful for them from the political leaders in the city and the state, from the mayor, from the governor, and from others without going through all the different names. But my message is now my mantra. Something needs to be done. And I'm very, very hopeful. Maybe as one person says to me, Michael, you're Rabbi Miller, you're the poster child. I really wish I were not. I wish I were not looking at my now surgically repaired right leg, which is going to take weeks, if not months, if not a year, to fully get back my mobility. I'm trying the best that I can. I'm trying to be very positively motivated. But part of that motivation, and in great part due to the fact that I've been victimized, is doing everything that is feasible for me to accomplish on the legislative side to implement laws in the city of New York, for the state of New York, that enhance the quality of life for all New Yorkers. This is not a Jewish issue. It's not a Christian issue. It's not by faith. It's not by ethnicity. It's not by race. This is about humanity. It's about people. It's about pedestrians. We can all be victimized by it. And it's not only in the streets. It's even on the sidewalks. It's frightening. And I'm very motivated, as you can tell. And I've had conversations I can't get into during this call, but conversations with decision makers in this regard, and be happy the next part of this conversation just to tell you what I think some of the remedial steps that need to be taken are taken.
Rabbi, you use the word victimize, which means usually to be subject to deception or fraud or cheated in some way. Explain that. How were you victimized? Because of the recklessness of the individual on the bike, the fact that, or was it because they left you? Essentially, it was almost like a hit and run. What is the victimization exactly?
The victimization is both of what you just had mentioned, but what was that recklessness? The recklessness was that we have traffic laws in the city of New York and in the country, but we live in the city of New York. We have traffic laws in the city of New York. You don't ride a vehicle against traffic. It's not healthy for the driver, nor certainly is it healthy for a pedestrian who gets struck. And as I think I mentioned before, of the 30 people who were killed last year, and I think that Assemblyman Alex Boris has done a study on this that I've read, whatever the percentage is, a percentage of those 30 deaths are deaths of bikers, of riders, not necessarily of pedestrians. So that to me was being victimized by somebody who was breaking the law. They were breaking the law, the traffic law, and that led to the encounter with a violent encounter with me. And secondly, you do something wrong, you take responsibility for it.
Right.
And this individual did not take any responsibility. They did not hold themselves accountable. We can theorize as to why, but what difference does that make? They just rode off. Indeed, it was a hit and run.
Yeah. We share as members of the clergy. We share in our beliefs around morals and ethics. And we begin with the worth and dignity of the human person. And unfortunately, the way we treat each other in our society right now, we've lost that respect. We've lost that sense of worth and value and dignity for each human person, no matter who they are. Rabbi Pasasnik?
I'm listening to this. I'm thinking to myself, here are people who have total disregard for the law. They don't care. And they can get away with it. The fact that it's taken so many deaths so many injuries, so much pain, and we're talking about what needs to be done. This should have been a conversation a long time ago. And I mean, bikes on the street is commonplace. I'm looking out, window now, and I see a bike passing by on the sidewalk, as you mentioned earlier, Rabbi Miller.
Yeah.
And people just walk around it.
Right.
We take it. It's living in New York. And I think we really have to look at ourselves and say, we failed on this. And
Rabbi, law is usually in response to lawbreakers, right? And that's how we end up with all these laws on the books, usually. But is there a problem with the system because it takes so long for the law or the system to respond to a situation like this?
I don't understand something. I have a car. All of us we drive cars. We got to get a license. We got to get a registration. We can't just, buy the car and drive away, right? Yeah. There's a law in place. And why aren't there laws in place for motorized vehicles? I don't understand that.
I refer to it as an acronym of RILLI. I'm going to add an E, RILLIE. Really, really. R, register the bike. I, inspect the bike. Remember that terribly tragic fire up in the Bronx. I think it was Twin Towers, where the African immigrants were killed in great numbers. That was a lithium-ion e-bike battery that exploded that caused that fire. Again, registration and inspection. First L is license. Put licenses on these bikes. They're traveling, as you said, Road Potasnik, they're traveling at the speed limit and beyond. They can go 25, 30 miles an hour. Yeah. So if you're sitting in a vehicle that's registered and licensed, shouldn't a four-wheel vehicle, shouldn't a two-wheel vehicle have a license on it? The second L is a license. We use that term loosely for the rider, for the driver, at least some sort of a requirement to have an ID. And then the last I is insurance. When you own a car, you have to have insurance on it. If you don't have insurance and you get stopped by a police officer, he or she can give you a ticket. And the E at the end is enforcement. It's one thing to have laws on the book, but if the laws are not going to be enforced, of what value are they? Those are the 6 items that I believe need to be accomplished, that some of what, if not all of which, is included in the legislation that I've seen that's been circulating up in Albany that wasn't acted on. And I know that the city leadership is thinking very seriously about this issue. And as I said to the mayor, utilize me. I have a voice. I thank God I have a relatively decent reputation and a platform. Just take advantage of the fact that I'm the lucky guy. I'm the lucky guy. All that I have, and all that is in quotation marks, all that I have is a broken leg. And now a titanium rod in my leg. I'm not. Thank God wasn't killed. And thank God I didn't have a head injury. Think about all those people who have had brain and head injuries. I was speaking, there's an organization that was established to dealing with this issue. One of the co-chairs of the organization is a woman who used to be a cellist, I think a concert level cellist, who's now paralyzed on the right side and she'll never play cello anymore. So I thank God. We're clergy persons, but everyone should be thankful of God. But I certainly thank God that all that happened to me was that my right leg was broken and surgically repaired by an incredible surgeon and the team at Weill Cornell and the Hospital of Special Surgery. A shout out to them, the doctors, the nurses, etc. That's all that happened to me. But thank God, and it's being evidence right now. I have a voice, and I have good friends like the two of you.
I think that makes a distinction because so many people this happens to, and they don't have the level of influence that you have, the platforms, the relationships, the voice. So it just goes by. You know what I mean? thank God that, unfortunately it happened to you, but it happened to someone who can actually stand up, say something, and make a difference.
Yeah, and a lot of those people who have been impacted by the irresponsible riders have no faith in the system. They say, what's the sense of even complaining? Nobody's going to do anything about it. I mean, that's a low point when we don't care anymore because we don't think people care enough to do something about it. Michael Miller, thank you. You reminded me of a story that I read years ago. Rabbi Telushkin wrote a story in one of his books of a woman who would put her fingers in her ears when the ambulance would pass by because the sirens were so blaring. It was very hard for her to take. One day she was victimized by a heart attack, and an ambulance came to rescue her. And she said from that day on, she never put her fingers in her ear. From that day on, she said, she recited the prayer, may they arrive safely at their destination, return safely to their homes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I think,
story.
When you think of what happened to you, thank God we have first responders. Thank God we have that Mira, that woman you mentioned earlier. There are good people.
Mira.
Yeah, there are good people out there. They're around us.
Yeah.
And hopefully, as a result of what happened to you, more is going to be done, and we won't have conversations like this in the future. Thank you.
Wow. Yeah, thank you for being on the program and sharing a very, very personal experience. And, of course, we pray that you will have a speedy recovery. We don't know how long this is going to take, but thank God that you're alive.
Thank God for that. And speaking about, first of all, thank you so much, both dear friends, Rabbi Potasnik and Reverend Bernard, for inviting me onto this program. When I was in the ambulance, I asked the EMT, why are there no sirens? Why don't I hear anything? And his answer to me was, because this is not a life or death issue. When the matter of one's life is on the line, that's when they're going to turn their lights and sirens on. So I thank God that it wasn't a life or death issue for me, and I'm able to continue my life and try to do good things for the people of New York and for everyone, and for giving me this opportunity to speak about what we, I think, need to accomplish in order to ensure the safety and quality of life here in this wonderful city.
Thank you. Rabbi Michael Miller.
All right. And stay tuned for more of the Rev and the Rabbi right here on 77 WABC. We'll be right back.